Welcome to Nameless Debate Radio, where radioactivity is contagious. You can join us in broadening our minds on the Nameless Debates Discord via the link below, and even feature here yourself, if you've got what it takes.
And like, I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not even sure.
No.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things. Like, Joshua was talking a bit about like how we can kind of notice the state change of being there, and let's just say there is in the transcendent, experiencing a synchronicity, a serendipity, a syzygy, some alignment of information that allows us to perceive significance, at least from our vantage point, subjectively. And then if we start to share that in some way that causes, I think what the Flow Genome Project calls group flow, where we all start kind of resonating on that same, I hate using the word vibration, but like where we get the vibe and everyone's feeling good with it. And it's just like you're listening to a song that's giving you the goosebumps or something.
Yeah, that's a very hard thing to explain. But actually, I started earlier. I created the bridge earlier, and I created it. I brought a little bit of light to the video, to the audio recording, because in the audio recording, you represented a double attitude to the phenomena. On the one hand, you knew it was significant. On the other hand, there was this
reservation
salesman selling a used car here. What the hell is this, right? And I want. That's right. I wanted to bring that up because this particular, the only way to understand it is to understand the phenomenology around it, and part of the phenomenology around it is this double attitude, which appears. I mean, there's no question that something compulsive happens in people where they have to boundary the meaning of what they're experiencing. Otherwise, there's a sort of devastating logical effect to the whole structure of how one creates meaning in one's life and what one believes the world really is, right?
Yeah.
And I think we do it, we boundary it compulsively. It's not a rational move, and everyone seems to have a different compulsive nature around it. Because I don't think if you think about it rationally, you, as a scientist, you're compelled to say to yourself, okay, this is an anomaly, but this anomaly tells me that everything else means something different.
Yeah.
And that's, and people don't want to do
very confronting. Yeah, very confronting.
That's right. Yeah, it's very confronting. And so, well, that's what happened to me. I had a very irrational framework, which I was building up brick by brick. And I decided as a teenager, I was just going to move one evidentiary step at a time into the real world. And I wasn't going to be bothered by what anyone else had to say about it, except I was going to listen to what their claims were and see if I could validate. The experiment was, what could I validate through my own evidentiary stream? And for one reason or another, I felt that was the only way to go, because I really didn't feel that other people's stories about religious phenomena were trustworthy. So I get to a certain point in my life where my friends start talking about psi phenomena, and I didn't want to. I actually struggled with this. Like, I didn't mind listening to it, but I felt a little apprehensive about the time wasted talking about something that wasn't real. And I didn't see that there would be any evidentiary support for some of these ideas. For some reason, and it's very naive, I think a lot of people, actually mature people, actually don't believe, for some reason, a priori, that they don't believe there is an evidentiary stream. And part of it is, I think, the misdirection of the East, where they begin always by saying there is a spiritual world out here, but your five senses will not help you. I'd say you got to abandon your senses, which means you got to abandon your empirical attitude, because here's a world that your empirical attitude cannot cope with and will mislead you.
The Maya and the Leela.
I think more than anything else, like one of the problems that I encounter that kind of thinking is that like Eastern philosophies tend to not even just accept but promote contradiction. And so like if the correction metric that the West is using is don't contradict yourself, when you come up against someone who's like actually contradictions are spot on, it's like, all right, well, like we just fundamentally disagree about that.
Yeah.
So isn't finding the contradiction in the world, like, or finding even what contradicts it within your personal self, like when you meet, that's the confrontation of the contradiction. And when you do that, that's the beginning of the end. Like that's the beginning of discovering, because once you learn to resolve the paradox through,
that's right.
Through adjusting your altitude and adjusting your cognitive development to wrap your mind around two conflicting positions, that's when you realize that it's not a dichotomy and that it is just one thing, two sides of the same coin. Do you relate to that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. So
for sure.
My position, my position is that synchronicity is one of those things where if you brace yourself and start thinking about it, it will open a door to another world. But if you trivialize it and make it and leave it as an anomaly that you can't make heads or tails of, it can, I think, slow progress down. And that's what most people do in one way or another. Now, the reason I think this is actually very, very important is because the phenomenology of synchronicity most probably, almost certainly, is related to people's religious ideas. So the history of Western religion is connected to this phenomenology. And if it is, I mean, that's just a supposition as you approach it. You go, wait a minute, maybe. And it's an intuition a lot of people have. It's not like I'm this brilliant person who imagines this. A lot of people have it. It's actually the first thing they think. They go, wait a minute, this experience, this tells me that maybe this is what other people have been talking about that my rational mind when I was younger just couldn't even create a space for. And here it is. This is what
contextualize it.
That's right.
Yeah, but part of you, I think, with a lot of people, immediately there's a compulsive feeling like, oh, that can't be true. That would be just that would make this too weird. So you immediately dampen that idea. But at least I did for a long time until I started to see that there was a whole evidentiary historical trace that pointed to this fact, actually. So
would you think
what we know about the universe, but then we include that and transcend and include that into our conception of the universe, and then we do tend to look for support, like where else does this exist? It can't just be an anomaly. And then you see these religious practices who have a long history of these experiences mixed in with a whole other bunch of crap, but but then there's there is a long history of this, and then you
exactly
kind of feel maybe a bit comforted, and maybe then you can learn the skills. Maybe there is a skill to this.
That's right.
To achieving this process. And one question I had for you, Joshua, and probably the rest of you as well, is: do you believe that this is an emergent property? That is, that the result or the impact is more than the sum of the parts?
No, I don't.
Well, more than the sum of the parts is a very general idea, and what it means is that what you're saying is that the individual and the universe have some sort of dynamic, almost as though you're implying that our existence is an existence in a space-time continuum. And surprise, surprise, it's true. We actually do exist in a continuum. When people say the word, they don't actually understand what it means. And to live in a space-time continuum is to live in a constant a synchronistic state where time, matter, and this is the part that I think Matthew both agrees with and has trouble with. The third one is information. But information, I would take it, there's a certain danger with the term information. I agree with it, but there's a certain risk with it. And the risk is I would ratchet up to metaphor. So rather than just say information, metaphor. And that's the thing that
metaphor is information that has been analyzed and translated. Would you agree to that?
No, metaphor is information, it takes information from just a kind of data, let's say a step up, from an octave up from just data and logic to elegance and structure. Now you can still argue that's data and logic.
Generalization.
It's starting to look like a one order up from it, where now we're not just talking about data and logic, we're talking about pattern.
Isn't metaphor closer to like an analogical representation though?
You see, the thing is I go from the experience out. And if you go from the experience out, the way I describe it to people, because I just describe it as my own experience. Part of my work as a philosopher, or the promise to myself was, if I do discover something, I want to be able to tell other people what I discovered. And
of course.
And if there's a certain path where I go down it, I won't be able to tell anyone. I actually regard that as not being my path. I want to take the path where I can actually tell it. So I've always insisted on being able to project, or as articulately as I can, what it is I've seen, or what it is I think is going on, or how it is I cope with it. So it began with really loving Shakespeare. Like Shakespeare really turned me on. It got me into the belief that writing activity, mainly Hamlet, but and also T.S. Eliot. The
Wasteland.
People, yes, exactly. Especially the Wasteland. And so from these, I got this romantic idea of like omens and signs, and this idea around, which is a literary idea, and I approached it from a literary point of view. Foreshadowing, that seemed like a really interesting literary idea. So I was picking up these literary ideas, and slowly but surely I started paying attention to movies and noticed that these literary ideas appeared in movies as well, which made sense to me, since a lot of these movies are based on books. And then as I got closer and closer to this, I would say, synchronistic perspective, I noticed one very annoying feature of my interpretive experience of the world, and that it was starting to appear very literary to me. And there were things like omens. I went, fuck that, what? That's a little fucking scary. And then there were things like foreshadowing, and then there was things like little subtle metaphorical plays that were symbols of bigger metaphorical plays that were to come. That's fucked up. That's just
the literary term synecdoche.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly what I'm talking about. And that's like almost like this idea, or the synchronistic idea, to the level where it's almost like a nightmare which you can barely stand to experience.
Where the part represents the whole.
Could you just clarify what the word means?
It's where the individual represents the whole, or a part represents the whole, and so it's kind of like a hologram.
Okay. Yep.
Where
so like fractal, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I've heard it pronounced synecdoche, but I could be mistaken.
It is synecdoche.
Synecdoche. Okay.
Yeah.
So Matthew brings something interesting up, and I want to include it because it's an important part of it. Part of the pattern and elegance of the synchronistic experience is that it's got a fractal quality. There's no question one experiences this fractal elegance, and what it is logic that seems to be coherent across scopes of scale.
Right.
So so that at every scope somehow there's a set of logical relationships that gives you the sense that you're living in this very complex set of codes or puzzles that are working together, like a sort of clockwork of heaven.
Right.
This clockwork of heaven seems to have its own operations in its scope, and yet it's a fragment of the scope above it, and that logic seems to continue on as far as we can see in the macrosphere and as far as we can see in the microsphere.
Yeah.
Okay, so
when you start having the sensation like, oh, I remember this, that's when it gets freaky. You know what I mean? Where
Of
instead
course,
of like, I know this from a previous persona, like I know this from a previous form, and
Yes.
and then I remember. You know, that's when it's like, you know, holy shit, like we're onto something here, you know?
That's the other part of it. And the other part of it is that part of this synchronistic awakening is that you were suddenly I wouldn't say master, but you had some sense of the territory of your own life, and then immediately the time question opens up, and the territory of your life seems much vaster, and your problem seems to have been part of a vast problem. And then, well, is this all projection? Of course it's not. And you know that to some degree, all of the experiences you're having must be embodied logically in the universe. So it's not like you're inventing a scenario that you know is not true. You know that the scenario is logically there, but it doesn't make sense to you that it would be observable.
I think you're right, Joshua. I think that we also have to be open to the idea that it is our projection, because to know the difference between a hallucination and sober, whatever you want to call that, I can't tell
exactly. But this is my point.
It wouldn't be a hallucination. It wouldn't be an illusion unless it actually worked to trick us. And so, like, at least we believe that we are the authority to determine reality from fiction. But the reality is that fiction is also real. It's just real on a different plane. And so the fiction can tell us more about reality than the sober reality. That's
a terrible way of thinking about it, though, because it's a way of denying its reality in order to cope with it, which this comes back to,
but we don't know.
If we believe that it's the projector that's creating the projection, and I think all of us do here, and Brendan, you're the one who's bringing this up.
The projector is in the subject.
That's right. So,
I don't believe that.
Well, I've heard you say that, so maybe we're not.
I think that we're picking up
words.
That our sense.
What I mean is that the. I know it. I'm not saying that the projection is absolutely the subjective projector. What I'm saying is that there is an aspect of the projection that's a function of the subject.
Oh, yes, I would definitely agree to that.
Yeah, we all agree to that. But
I think what we were just talking about
Mm-hmm.
before was spookily reminiscent of Plato's theory of recollection.
Yeah, it is. Plato understood this material, so I would say that Plato understood synchronicity, and one of the things I would say, and I know this is it might be shocking to some of you, but it might make sense. One of the reasons I often say that people don't really understand the allegory of the cave is because he's actually describing the synchronistic experience. That's what he's talking to people about, and so that's what he's actually talking about, something real. This is not an allegory about how when we have a discussion, someone doesn't understand us, and if all of that. He's actually talking about he discovered, he experienced, realized to some degree, lived through a quality of being human. I just regard it as a sort of human destiny or sort of lost understanding. I don't know if we ever had it, but it has a lost quality because it's always there and we never occupy it.
You at least
one way of looking at it. So
surely though,
Yeah.
Surely, though, you would say that even if the allegory of the cave is what you say it is, it's also an analysis of epistemology.
Right.
Like it would
Yes.
have to be. Yes.
Well, it would have
okay.
to be. That's the way I would say it. It would have to be, because he's dealing both with the problem. Well, first he's dealing with the epistemological problem of being in the real world, and it appears as though he managed that. And this is a rare accomplishment, and only a few people seem to be able to do it. And to some degree, I know, because I've experienced it to one degree or another. And because I have, I know it's real. And so the question is, how do you get closer to it? How do you make it happen? How do you bring yourself there? And what kind of training do you need to occupy it in any successful way? And it turns out that the Buddhist tradition is probably the best training for that kind of thing. And I regard that as not a coincidence. So the thing that I discovered from actually learning to occupy the space, so the skill of, let's say, what stalking synchronicity,
Mm-hmm.
I learned that it was an avenue for understanding a number of different traditions. And
Okay.
to some degree, I regard it as a scientific way of examining these traditions. And what I like about Matthew's approach is he does like to take a step-by-step approach into it. And I like to too, because my belief has been, and my strategy has been, take one careful step at a time towards it, and stop going in a loop. So one of the things I would say to Brendan is, there's a loop that you're probably going to, and this again, this compulsive loop, and the loop is to keep bringing to your mind that this may be an hallucination, this may not be real, right? And I just think that one just gets in the way. You got to at some point say, okay, there's something here that's real, and now the only question is, what is it? And because there's a quality to this reality which happens to challenge the scientific tradition. And I don't think that's a problem. It's a part of the problem space that many people don't want to accept. And that is the subject is very much, and even the nature of the group of subjects is part of the problem. So,
we're part of the measurement at the very least, and we can't.
It's part of the because what synchronicity is a resonance chamber, and so if the resonance is wrong, it doesn't resonate. That's just That's just one way of saying it, but that is what it is. And so if two people are together and they don't resonate, it's not going to happen there. And to be honest with you, if it's happening for me and someone who I don't resonate with comes into my space, it immediately brings it right down.
Yeah,
I can't even
sounds almost pointed, that remark.
Yeah.
What's that? No, it wasn't. It really wasn't. But to be honest,
but what a happy coincidence.
Well, well, I don't know how the reason. I think the deeper reason why that was going on is not so much. Well, maybe it's partly a function of my will to make certain things happen, which probably is, that's part of my mischievous nature. But I sort of have an impatient quality sometimes around.
Yeah, I definitely got that feel.
And it's
because it's definitely the behavior that I see myself exhibit when I've run out of patience.
Yeah, it takes one to know one.
It's universal.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, I think both Matthew and I know for sure, love the progress part of it. I don't like to see progress be, what's the word?
Forestalled?
Forestalled, sabotaged for nonsense.
Labor.
Right.
Occam's razor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I actually didn't think it would happen this way. But there is one problem, and I really do think, and it comes back to the synchronicity thing. And I know it sounds like a wild claim. And it's all
epistemology for a bit.
What's that?
Can I talk about epistemology a bit?
Of course.
I like John Locke, what John Locke's view was, and it was at some point we must believe or trust. And so he's, pure empiricist, coming
Yeah.
off the back of Descartes, like complete rejection of mentalism. And so believed, that the exterior world was real. And so he said at some point we must believe that our sense perceptions are picking up on or observing an exterior world that we cannot validate except through other sense perceptions. So this is why I have a healthy level of agnosticism about my perceptions, but I also
know, but that idea was actually wrong.
Well, hold on there, because what I also do is I'm okay with that. I'm okay with them being wrong, and I'm okay with them just being illusions, because the process is to extract wisdom or impact that can be generalized from those perceptions, because I can have a hallucination that is, by all accounts that we can come up with, have peer review or whatever, that to say that yes, that was a hallucination, but I can extract impact from that. Like, I've misheard songs, particularly Radiohead songs, misheard the lyrics and be like, wow, that's so profound. Or you go to an art gallery and you look at that painting, like, oh, I see this thing, and it's really meaningful, and then go in and like really change your life around because of what you saw in that painting. And then you go like to the painter and they're like, yeah, I don't know, I was just throwing paint on the canvas. You know what I mean?
Well, no, you never trust a painter. That's just nonsense.
Well, of course, you're right.
It's like you're looking for something that you don't know is there.
Well,
no, the person doing it
found something that wasn't there. So it's whether you're looking for it or not.
But is it the case that it's not there? Or is it the case that
it's always
nobody knew it was there?
It's always there. It's only
I am a painter.
I am a painter. Observed it. It's not there unless you've observed it. Or
I'm not sure if I agree with that on an epistemological level.
So if it is there,
it's been terrible epistemology. It's been terrible epistemology since Brendan started talking there, and I don't mean to be rude when I say that, but there is this moment where I was talking about how the projector is projecting their interpretation, right? So with Brendan, I have to say, you're projecting an interpretation, and you're projecting an interpretation even on the dialogue. So it's like a habit. It's like a form of music. It's like music that you're making. And
my question for you would be, what is metaphor, in your opinion?
What is the metaphor?
No, what is metaphor, generally?
Oh, well, what it is we're in a phenomenological process that's billions of years old, and what I suspect is that there have been many self-emergent properties that have organized themselves in this existence. I'm not making any propositions about how it began or what it is. All I know is that there does appear to be a tremendous amount of organization in the world before I came to it. I came into a very organized world that was much more organized than I suspected. So as a child, I had no idea how organized it was, and I wouldn't have believed it, and I think it would have overwhelmed me. I don't think I wanted to know at a certain point.
Are you saying then that metaphor is the phenomenological apprehension of the fractal order of the world?
Yeah. Yes,
I
would say that.
Very good.
Okay. I'd probably accept that. Okay. So
here's the thing, though. Here's the thing about the synchronistic experience. So now I'm getting into like wild territory, but it's something to consider, and it comes back to some of the things that Rupert Sheldrake says. You guys familiar with Rupert?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you, Matthew?
Morphic resonance.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
So like he talks about the 10 rules, the 10 laws of science, or the 10 assumptions of science, and sorry, an event just occurred in my life here, and I'm just taking that in. It's synchronicity, to tell you the truth. That's the other part of the hilarious aspect of it. But what he says is, we like to think about the laws of nature as being consistent as coherent, but one of our assumptions are they don't transform, they don't change. That's one of the interesting ideas he projects. And I keep that in mind as I describe this particular conundrum. So Jung tries to wrap his mind around synchronicity, right? And as he's trying to wrap his mind around synchronicity, or maybe it should be the other way around, it's Pauli, who is this quantum physicist, who's trying to wrap his mind around certain physical phenomena, trying to create a model for it. So Pauli is dealing with quantum physics, and there he's dealing with time in this very, very fragile and sensitive way, and he's also dealing with atomic physics. Yeah, so in science, this whole conundrum appears through the quantum physics framework, right? But the interesting synchronicity is Pauli is here talking to Jung, and both of them are trying to figure out how this could possibly make sense. And Jung's at first move, I think it's a bad move, because it again is a compulsive way to avoid the problem. It's just regarded as acausal phenomena. But when he talks about it as being acausal, he describes it as it appearing to be causal, but not possibly causal.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he means by acausal. But the problem is that there does appear to be an unexplainable causal nature to it.
Are you sure it's unexplainable though?
I don't think it's unexplainable. I think it is explainable, but
is it causal or is it acausal?
It's causal in a different framework. So
is in the ontological sense, is it causal or acausal?
I would say it's causal.
Causal.
Interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that just that the paradigm that Jung is thinking of the real world in, the only way you resolve the paradox is by calling it acausal. I think that's not a good resolution. If you believe that the universe is coherent, and that's always my first assumption, something truly remarkable has to happen for me not to believe that. Nothing's ever contradicted that first principle, and I doubt anything ever will. And so then the question is to look for what's the framework? What's the logical framework that this phenomena could be happening in? So here's one very, very interesting. I love to follow almost like literary motifs. So when you read Jung, you'll notice he has two competing theories of the nature of synchronicity. And this is what makes it really fucking fascinating, because I also had these two competing theories, and I went back and forth, almost like a cognitive dissonance between the two. And one of them is that synchronicity only happens in these key moments, right? These at a certain time on a certain day, everything lines up, and all around him appears that his existence is pure metaphor, and he's existing as a pure metaphorical existence in this pure metaphorical existence. And then he goes, well, it only happens in these moments. Other times it's not happening. And then he goes, this appears to be a very, like me as well, this appears to be a very doubtful framework. Like, what am I saying? That only in this moment that the whole universe line up this way, and all the other times it's not? The more likely possibility is that it's always happening. So then he goes, and other times he goes, I suspect that it may be that it's always happening, and it's only at certain times that we are capable of seeing it.
Right.
Do you see the interesting binary this creates? And I think the solution is a solution that includes both realities, that something does actually change. during this.
What does that mean, though? Like, what does it mean to say that something does actually change?
Which with the rules seem to here's my dramatic wild claim. It almost seems that to some degree, to a certain degree, in the locality you're in, the rules of nature change, or the laws of nature change, or that you're in a higher octave of the laws of nature, where what were laws before seem a little more fluid than they were before.
We can outgrow the laws of nature as we previously understood them. And that's outgrowing them means resolving them to where what may at one point be an issue, like having a law against theft only matters if you have the proclivity or the temptation to thieve. And as soon as you outgrow that and you become mature to where and secure, mature and secure, where you don't need to steal and you don't have that temptation, that kind of ceases to be a law. And so that's a rudimentary example of how laws, and that of course that's a human imposition on nature, but I think that it also is consistent within the laws of nature. I
think really... it's an interesting one, because I don't think that people actually do steal because they need to. Most of the time people steal for the rush.
Yeah. So there's mature and then secure. So I started. I said
okay,
mature.
Fair enough.
So if they could learn to convert that rush into a.
How do we get to fucking stealing?
What's that?
I was wondering how we got to stealing.
Using it as an example to show how we can how we outgrow laws. And
okay, but that seems to conflate.
That isn't what I'm talking about.
Wait a minute, though. I feel like that conflates the law as in a subjective representation of a rule and the rule itself, right? Because the laws of nature, we call them laws because we're subjectively representing them. But what we mean when we say the law of nature is not something similar to what we mean when we say a law of society. Because laws of society can be broken and laws of nature cannot.
I preface by saying that by saying that the human constructed law is different than the natural law. But went ahead with the analogy, but I think for instance, gravity, the law of gravity, but we have we haven't necessarily outgrown gravity, but we've learned ways to build flying machines and ways to work through it or around it,
transcend it,
or rather actually work with it.
Transcending it, it's not
work with it, yeah.
Because if you think about the way that our spacecraft work, to a large degree, it is not that we outwit gravity, but rather that we harness it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I mean by redirecting that force from something that's less healthy to something that's more healthy, more whole.
Sublimate.
Yeah. But that's where the transcendence comes in. So once you've learned how to successfully do that, you resolve the contradictions, and it's no longer a part of reality. I mean, it's no longer part of your reality. And then on a larger level of the laws of nature, you're really distilling what is the immutable law of nature, or is the law of nature dynamic and move with our challenging of it, you know?
Okay. Yeah. I can't not agree with that, but you know, what am I? I just want to.
Nothing to agree with or disagree with. It was a suggestion. It was like a.
No, I know,
this might be stepping backwards a touch, but I didn't really grasp why exactly you didn't accept acausality, right? You said that Jung believed that the world was acausal. I'm not too sure why you disagree.
Well, because it's I guess my argument is more terminological. Like when people hear about synchronicity as being acausal, it gives them license in their mind not to confront the causal nature of it.
Or the interactive nature, maybe?
Is that necessarily true? Or is that just human proclivity?
Well, it's a human proclivity, and I think the
Yes.
human proclivity. So this is why I keep talking about compulsion. And actually, I know this might sound strange to you guys, but I hear it in Brendan to some degree, and it's this this feeling that we need to contain this with a rational, I don't know, dampening. It's almost like you need to put some insulation on the wall so that the echoes don't resonate. And you can actually hear it as an actual experience in us talking about it. So, like, even talking about it, you have to be prepared for the fact that it becomes metaphorical. The actual talking about it is metaphorical. It's part of the odd, strange quality of it. Now, you might believe I'm projecting it, but then the question will be, as you continue to observe our discussions as we approach it, am I creating the fact that it's metaphorical, or is that as we talk about it, everybody takes a deeply metaphorical relationship to it that their egos are not in control of? And that's partly what happened with Dave.
So, like, I would definitely agree that, like, there's a metaphorical, in the sense that I defined what you meant by metaphorical before. There's definitely, like, a strong metaphorical component. I think the relevant question for me is, like, what is that? Like, why is that? How is that? Why is there a metaphor?
Yeah, that's a
why
good
is
question.
there not nothing? Right?
No, I think the way you build up the problem is archetypally correct. The way the something nothing discourse you have, I actually had it myself as well, and I came to pretty well the same conclusions. I used to write about zero a lot, so the fact that there's something means right away that regardless of what we think it is, and regardless of our misconceptions, something's still happening, and that means there's a challenge for skill. And it may be true that you develop skill and you find that there's nothing there, but that isn't the case. And you can almost guess intuitively that it's not going to be the case. So the nihilist position is just ridiculous.
Literally nonsensical, and by their own
literally
definition.
nonsensical.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's a position such that it could not be sensible.
Exactly.
And it almost holds that as virtue.
What's shocking is that it's popular. So and this is popular among very intelligent people, which again comes back to my argument that there's something compulsive here. There's something compulsive that doesn't want to deal with the scope of the truth before us. Just doesn't want to.
Universal,
we like stability, right?
What's that?
We like stability, right? So, like, when we're dealing with the world, in its entirety, we are in an unknown land. We
Exactly.
nothing about the environment is stable at that point. It's uncomfortable.
Exactly. Yeah. And so
y'all making fun of nihilists.
Well, it's shocking to me that it actually became more popular as I was doing my philosophical work. Every once in a while, I look at the culture. I go, really? You got to be kidding. And then I go, well, this is going to pass. I keep going, this is going to pass. This is just like
it will pass. It will pass.
If we can survive it, it will pass.
You mean the people who it attracts?
Well, it's gotten a little crazy now. Now it's become, to me, a little surreal.
Like mainstream?
What we're playing out, the whole like it's just like a bad philosophical argument, like a teenage, an adolescent philosophical argument in the first place, and it appears to be moving towards being played out in dramatic ways. And now I'm going, this is what it was like when people were watching World War II unfold. They're going, fuck, this is crazy, but it's going to happen.
Nihilism is equivalent to an intellectual pout, though, right?
Intellectual what?
Pout.
An intellectual pout.
Pout?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, is it the sour face that a child pulls?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess it is. I guess that's...
Oh, you're saying because they're like, I don't understand it, so poof.
Yeah, so it cannot be understood, essentially, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing saying that we can't believe.
Well, there's a reason for its growth.
That's.
I mean, nihilism is more the belief that there's not a point for anything.
No, actually, there's two distinct types of nihilism. One is epistemological nihilism, which is the proposition that there is nothing that's true, and then there's existential nihilism, which is the proposition that there is nothing that is significant.
Oh, well, no, I think things can be significant. I just think
it's harder to argue against the second.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say that things are subjectively significant, and it shouldn't be a surprise to us that they're not objectively significant, because significance is a subjective construct.
No, yeah, it depends on what you count as significant.
Because it can only be significant if it's significant to something, and that requires it being relationship, unless you're talking about objective level.
Have you guys heard Norm Macdonald's version of this conundrum? It's pretty funny. He's a comedian, and he actually means it pretty seriously. He starts with going like, well, you know what infinity is? And I actually object to the idea of infinity in the first place.
God, I love that you said that. I constantly rail on about how infinity makes no sense.
Yeah. Well, he begins
it's ridiculous, man.
Yeah. This is the best argument. It's the insignificance argument.
Which infinity? Are you talking about
null? Technically mathematical infinity.
Is that whole numbers, or are you talking like Aleph null, which is like in between 0 and 1?
No. I'm saying that there is such a thing as the mathematical objects that we have labeled as infinity, but they're more properly called endless sets.
Right.
And infinity couldn't make any sense, because if we're talking about infinity in mathematical terms, right, then we're talking about an infinite number, and then a small translation on that gives us this, an infinite finitude. And like, do I need to go any further?
Not really.
Yeah. So anyways, he says, well, any significant thing you do compared to infinity is 0. Therefore, anything you do is meaningless.
It's a good joke, actually.
It is, actually. The problem is
he's using the sheer fact that
he sort of believes it.
That as a point to be pouty about life, I guess.
Yeah, in a way, it seems like he's trying to point out the absurdity of actions. So, move into inactivity, and somehow
Albert Camus.
Infinity justifies it.
I'm not the type of nihilist that just sits down and goes, I'm not going to do anything because there's no point to anything. I'm just going to sit in my fucking parents' basement and do nothing.
Is there another type of nihilist? Like, if you're not that type of nihilist,
well, I don't know. I kind of maybe I'm not a nihilist.
Yeah, there is an aspect to nihilism.
Maybe I don't know the definition of the words good enough, and I'm willing to accept that I might be ignorant to my own philosophical outlook.
What I would say, though, is that if you do things, you cannot genuinely hold the proposition that nothing is significant, because otherwise, why would you do anything?
Yeah. So
chemical releases in my brain that make me happy.
Then you hold those things to be significant.
Well, I mean, I can understand that I get happy because my brain releases dopamine.
No, but I'm saying, like,
that make me happy.
Yeah, if those chemical releases matter to you, then something matters to you.
Yep. And if it matters to do the things that provide that result, then it also
doesn't matter to a significant amount, I guess.
No, but that's irrelevant. Like, the fact that you're going to say it doesn't matter objectively is like a non sequitur. That's completely beside the point.
You can't really say nothing matters objectively, because there's nothing really.
Well, then what are you saying? That's the question. What are you saying then?
I don't know.
Yeah.
No, saying that nothing has any objective value is a little retarded, because there's no really such thing as,
of course,
objective.
But that's exactly that's what existential nihilism is.
Right. So Albert Camus had the idea that, once you realize life is absurd, meaning there's no objective value, the only question is how, not if or when, but how are you going to commit suicide?
But I think, again, Camus conflated epistemological nihilism and existential nihilism. He goes, so there's no significance to life, therefore there's no, there is no meaning, full stop. And I don't think that that's actually accurate.
I am not completely dead.
Like, the world is not
I don't think
absurd.
That makes me a nihilist.
It may seem absurd, but it ultimately isn't.
Right.
I think it's even more complicated than that, and that is that many people, and this is why I brought up at the very beginning of the conversation Eddie's double-sided view of it, where on one level it's a sham, it's snake oil. On another level, it's something real that is a kind of like dais for exploration. And even just getting some sort of verbal understanding of it, because the other claim I would make is that alchemy was all about preparing the individual for that experience, and that this experience was fairly well understood in Sumerian culture, and it was part of the initiation of the king. And there were good reasons for why they felt that a king had to have that kind of knowledge. Now, I'm pretty sure they knew that this was rare phenomena, but I think they actually had a system for repeating it to some degree. And much of the origins and the foundation of Western religion and Western culture are little glints of that process, that initiation, that broken telephone set of ideas. Like, I don't think anybody knows anymore. I think it was that whatever that was, that a great deal of it has been destroyed and misunderstood. But one of my little favorite games over the years is trying to piece it back together again. And also taking an experiential view on the matter. So at the same time that I'm researching how these people sorted this problem out, I'm also trying to figure out in real time the problem myself. And like the people I would point to that I believe, there's a number of philosophers that I believe were like very close to understanding it or understood it. And one of them is Empedocles, no question. And he represent, like, much of what we know as New Age today comes back to that guy. And the other one is Heraclitus. Those two, I think, are very important.
Interesting, because I would say actually that Plato and Parmenides were very close to understanding the world. And I think we need to make a distinction here, right? We need to say, like, one is an understanding of the subjective world and one is an understanding of the objective world. And I would say that when it comes to the phenomenological experience, you're perfectly justified in claiming that everything is change. But if that's the case, then change is unchanging.
What's the objective world?
No, he knew that. He knew that. He actually has a statement about stepping into the river that incorporates both those polarities.
You can't put the river twice because it's not the same and the river is not the same.
Some people claim, and I'm one of them, I think it's a reasonable claim that Heraclitus is the first person to actually start writing about quantum mechanics. That to some degree, his ideas are reflections of that awareness. You have to ask yourself, how could that even be possible? And it comes back to the synchronicity thing. And what I'm suggesting that in the synchronicity phenomenology, the experience of the collapse of the waveform, like, actually tangibly happens, unmistakably. So, like, at first I went, no,
unmistakably.
On to some degree, over time, it has become a forced reality on my mind that actually what's going on.
Is that an appropriate word?
Unmistakably. Yeah, well, that's probably too big a claim, maybe.
Probably,
but maybe not too. That's the thing.
Yeah, maybe not. But I just mean, if you have to say maybe, then you default to probably.
It's not unmistakably. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm leaning in that direction more and more at this point, because in my own mind, you know how we both came to the conclusion that we can't actually rationalize the phenomenology of synchronicity. Like, it always remains like, what the fuck? How do I include this in my idea of the world? And the only way that I can satisfy all of my experiential concerns, like all the facts of my experience, is with a collapse of the waveform model. And that model means, and so this would be would be what I mean, that in some way it's as though the universe is an equation, not just information, but an equation that collapses every moment, that includes every fact of every part of it. And I know that's a tough one.
Does it have to collapse?
It's the hologram again.
Well,
yeah, does it have to collapse?
Here's the thing. We do have a little probably difference of opinion on the multiverse universe question, but maybe not. It all depends on how you see it. I think I contextualize it a slightly different way, and I wanted to bring this up, so I'm glad it came up. I think it does collapse, but your subjective understanding of what that collapse is not necessarily what that collapse is, and that your subjective understanding of that collapse changes the nature of your experience of the collapse as though it was a different collapse. So now there is a multiverse. There's the logic of the reality continuing to play, and then there's a logic that you created from your projections continuing to play. So now it's a double life to some degree.
I feel like, though, implicit in the first proposition is the acknowledgement of the fact that maybe it doesn't collapse at all.
I think the problem with the maybe it doesn't collapse at all never actually agreed with me, but it's probably an argument that the nihilists would like to use. Once they give up the other problems, they'll probably come to that one. So that's why I intuitively go, oh no, if you're going to claim that maybe it doesn't collapse, you're going to claim that maybe nothing happens, and then
but actually I'm claiming the opposite. I'm claiming that because everything happens, it never needs to collapse.
Like the Akashic record.
Oh, here's the thing. Here's where. So what I have to do is go. You have to imagine that the phenomenology that I've experienced may be different than the phenomenology you've experienced. So that's like one claim I'm going to, right? And that means that we come back to this notion of laws of nature, right? Like things happening that don't make sense, but they're happening, right?
Well, they don't make sense to us, but yeah.
They don't make sense to us, or they're not making sense to me, but it's happening.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction, though. Because I feel like in the second statement, when we say "but it is happening," what we are saying is that it makes sense. It's just that we don't know how to make sense of it.
Right.
That's right. It's a fact of your life, but you don't know how, in what framework, all these facts can be together. So there's a compulsive. A force not to deal with the problem, and I don't want to be spending like a year just dancing around that. Part of me wants to get into the meat of it, if it's possible. See where we get to the point where we can no longer speak about it because nobody has any knowledge that will take us any further. Now here's an interesting story, and it's going to be a strange story. So the truth is, if I there are some strange stories that I could tell, but and I'm reluctant to tell them because I also have a model for how another person would have to logically make it make sense to them, right? That's part of the problem of the allegory of the cave. This is not a coincidence. It's part of the phenomenology, and it's part of what you should be expecting to go on as you start to deal with this. Does that make any sense?
What should you be expecting, sorry?
You should always be expecting that there's going to be difficult contradictions that are based on, for instance, that another scientist will have a set of experiences, a whole range of experiences that you haven't had, and therefore the evidentiary stream they have to rationalize is not the same as the evidentiary stream you have to rationalize. So certain propositions may be easier for you to hold than they would be for me.
I think
Do you think that there are propositions that are universally held?
Can I just chime in and say good night, everybody?
Yeah.
You're out of here, Brendan?
All right. Yeah, I got to go. All right.
Hey, brother. Good chatting with you.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
too. Enjoy.
Catch you later, man.
We'll finish another time.
We will
We
never
started
finish.
talking
but
about
we
a-
will- Maybe we
we
won't
started
finish.
talking
But we'll
about a-
continue.
Yeah,
We will continue.
And I'm looking forward to it.
It's a good
And I
distinction.
am looking forward to it.
Right?
What's your philosophical outlook on life in Sing?
On life, I'm an absolute individualist.
Which is
It's difficult to explain in summary form. I could explain it to you at length later on.
all right.
So,
Well,
Joshua,
I probably am too. I'm not sure what it means, but it sounds like something I probably am.
No,
So
I'm not.
So I would have to say with Matthew, I'm in agreement on this one. I don't think we have much choice to some degree. This is not the kind of world where very much complexity is allowed. So it's like you either live in a complexity that's internal to your understanding, or you don't get to live in it at all. And that's not much of a choice.
That's
I'm
a
still
fascinating remark.
it is very interesting.
Thank you for listening. Like, share, subscribe, and join us in the Nameless Debates Discord. We hope to see you there.